internally to what is being done within the framework of Lancashire County Council, and then obviously move on to the culture and sport fund and say something about that. So that's what we're going to move from the larger bit to internal, and then to kind of what we're doing in terms of our spending of money to promote culture. Whilst myself and John have been putting this agenda together, it's fair to say that we've worked harder on this particular item than any other, and that's because of the plethora of reports that have been produced over the years. There's remade, and this is the second version that was issued. There was an initial version produced by Tom Flanagan and Associates, and I ran across Tom when I used to work with the Northwest Development Agency many years ago, and Andy has produced an update on that, which came 6 months after Tom produced his version. And what Andy's done, I think it's fair to say, he's localized it an awful lot more extensively. There is also the other reports that myself and John have sent out. So and this was even before Peter's time, and Peter's been on, I think, your second term now, isn't it, Peter? Second? Yeah. So this is your third term as a county councillor. So there was a report produced in 2014, which was written by the Work Foundation, which is the organisation headed up by Will Hutton, based at Birmingham University, which we've emailed to members, and also a report produced by County Councillor Kevin Ellard when my colleague, the lovely John Shedwick, was actually chair of the Internal Scrutiny Committee way back in 2012, and so I think we're in the position to make a first recommendation, which is that when the cultural services document is being drafted, we'd like officers to go away and have a look at what's been said in these three reports, and to make comment on them and to work their way through the idea set. There's also another report which I've not distributed to members from a guy called Anthony Preston, who produced a report in 2017, which I'll email to Misbah, and then she can distribute that, which was something which the Arts Council encouraged Lancashire County Council to produce, which was a feasibility report into a Lancashire cultural partnership preparing for a sustainable future, and that was written by a consultant called Anthony Preston from Burnley. If anybody has ever run across him, but that's
tale that's in here is probably the best sort of summary of what cultural services have done since I've been as cabinet member. And one of the things that want to come out of today, you'll notice it is that we've got this cultural services strategy 24 to 28, which we're going to work on, and I'm very keen, as you're well aware in this scrutiny committee, is that the scrutiny committee helps to shape these strategies, not scrutinise the cabinet member after the strategy has been published. So I just want to sort of put that out, that it's sort of coming at it from a different angle, and that you're helping to shape the document that we're going to produce. I do know that Andy has to go fairly soon. I say soon, I mean probably will have to have gone already, but we're going to just go straight to effectively Appendix C, which is on page 27 of the report, which is the Let Cultural Investment Strategy. And I'm going to hand over to Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for those introductions.
I think to Andy.
By way of my sort of own introduction, as has been said by Jed, whilst I'm here today as part of the Economic Development Service at the County Council, I head up the business-facing business support services that we deliver. This piece of work probably relates more to a secondary role that I've held for the last 18 months, which is as interim chief executive for the Local Enterprise Partnership in Lancashire. As Jed has already alluded to, government's policy window for local enterprise partnerships is coming to an end. I had a relatively good innings, I would say, for government policies. We usually reckon about 9 years. The LEP has been in place for 12, but at the end of March, government will stop formally funding LEPs. There is a mixed picture of what will happen to the 39 LEPs across the English regions as that happens. Some will continue without core funding, delivering economic development services for the local authorities in their area, but the majority will be stood down, and integration plans are in place. Within Lancashire, it's fair to say that whilst those plans have been developed, our progress towards county combined authority makes things slightly more complex in that where combined authorities were already in place, LEP functions immediately transferred over to there. As we are in a sort of interim situation, and as the county council is the accountable body, it's highly likely that for financial and accountable body matters, the LEP functions will reside with the county council until a CCA is formally constituted. So that's the process we're going through at the moment. I guess my plea around this piece of work would be that the LEP had a decent grant and a decent revenue budget, which came both from central government, but also local partner contributions, and was able to do some of the things that local authorities at the time weren't. And one of those was thinking about the role of culture in terms of economic development. So I'd urge that you kind of don't throw the baby out the bathwater. Things have clearly moved on, and since 2018, when this piece of work was originally envisaged, I think was finally delivered almost into 2020, and as we sort of arrived at COVID, so things have clearly changed, but it does, I think, provide a useful landscape and something that can be reflected on as officers, and you as Scrutiny, and as Peter as lead member move towards recreating a cultural strategy for Lancashire. I think my colleague Ed, who can't be with us today, is actually doing some interviews for the Craft Council in London. But I think Ed's taken us down a cultural reference to Wes Anderson here. If anyone's particularly interested in his artistic style, but Ed's been central to this, and it's worth saying that whilst this was a LEP piece of work, there has been some permeability in terms of how county council officers have worked and supported this, in addition to the LEP zone investment. Just to say where this piece of work came from, I think people in the room would be well aware that Lancashire as a place has long been listed as a cold spot for Arts Council investment. Some parts of the county colder than others, but in general terms and looking at overall averages, we are well behind our metropolitan neighbours in terms of the level of Arts Council investment that is coming into to Lancashire as a place. As I say, we initiated this work in 2018 to look quite tactically. I think it's not really a strategic document. It is about positioning. It is about putting Lancashire more on the front foot in terms of being able to command some of that central government resource, not just from Arts Council, but also directly from the Departments for Culture, Media and Sport. You know, it really looked at the readiness of the council to receive that funding, and how the cultural narrative could be embedded within and be seen as a real part of the ambition, the economic ambition for the county. I suppose it's worth saying what it isn't as well at this stage. You know, and I think in his conversation with Jed and Councillor Shedwick around what's good and what's missing from this document, it is very culture-led. It is very much about the creative sector and the creative industries which flow from that. So it doesn't, in terms of the sort of broader LCC definition of culture, embrace particularly physical activity or sport. So that may be something that needs to be picked up. It also is heavily driven by an economic imperative around culture. So how culture emphasizes the place marketing of Lancashire, how it makes it a more attractive place to live, work and visit, because that is inevitably the angle that an enterprise partnership would take in terms of looking at an issue like this. But nevertheless, it's a standard consultancy approach. We picked Tom Fleming as one of the sort of leading practitioners in this area in the Northwest. A lot of experience both with the development agency and then in Liverpool City region particularly. And a significant piece of research was undertaken. And we then looked to a smaller group to provide some insights into what we thought that was telling us, leading to the first cultural investment strategy that Lancashire had produced. And at that time, the first one that any LEPs in the country had actually looked at producing. So you've each got the document, so I'll not dwell heavily in terms of the content there, but just to think about some of the real outcomes that came from that, and where the commissioning team saw issues and saw problems and felt that we could up our game in terms of presenting that clear narrative for what Lancashire wanted to do with culture, and on the back of that to actually win more investment. So the report is basically divided into 5 outcomes and 4 cross-cutting themes, which came from the analysis of the cultural sector that we saw and its relative success and profile in terms of drawing down resource and having a profile which extended beyond the actual work of the organisations and out into the wider community beyond Lancashire. So in terms of the areas for investment or improvement, the report highlighted increased connectivity as a key issue, meaning really the extent to which a large number of quite disparate arts organisations within Lancashire were connected to one another and had a shared agenda. This can be quite a competitive marketplace in which, success for one may mean a lack of resource for others. So we are working within that space. Nevertheless, I think bringing some of those cultural organisations together within networks has given them the realisation that they can actually collectively be more than the sum of the parts. So there's a key message around that. The second really sort of brings together my core day job around business growth and business support with the work and the analysis that was being done, which was around capacity. And I think when we looked at organisations, there are a number of organisations at scale who will have things like funding and bidding officers, but a lot of organisations which don't. And understanding how and the level of expertise and professionalism that's needed to bid into some of these national programmes, particularly around national portfolio organisations, was something we recognised as a deficit. So within our economic development programme and existing today as LCC, we do provide capacity support for organisations to actually do business development work and become more proficient in the way that they actually bid for resource, which hopefully from the ground up increases the capacity within Lancashire to be more successful. Again, point 3 really mirrors point 1, but I guess from the other end of the telescope, that individually, perhaps Lancashire's cultural organisations lack some of the scale and the prominence that's going to allow them to actually compete at a national level. And the more that we could encourage people to actually work and to collaborate with one another in shared programs and shared commissions, that would be a way that we could get to the necessary scale. Bolder commissioning and innovative infrastructure, again, goes to the point around collaboration, but also the ambition and the, I guess, the risk taking that would draw in the type of ambition that we hoped would be there, and that commissions would be seen as of national significance and things that were to be invested in nationally. And finally, in terms of vision and outcomes, that this should be nested within an overall compelling cultural narrative. That can sound quite critical, but I think the four overarching points actually describe what we found in the existing infrastructure of Lancashire, which is strong and which is good. And that is that, largely speaking, if those structures for collaboration didn't exist, they were emerging, and we did have a sort of nascent infrastructure around these organisations working in a more coordinated way. That a lot of the events that we already had were on their own growth trajectory, and that we didn't need to reinvent or to reimagine a programme that would give Lancashire that profile we needed. We just probably needed to invest more heavily to ensure that the things that were already out there were reaching their full potential. That we continue to support the idea of sort of convergence, and that we continue to build capacity within the sector. There's the vision for what we hope to achieve by 2030, that culture would sit at the heart of an economic growth approach. This messaging is still timely. Within the next 6 months, Lancashire is being asked to reframe its economic strategy. So the way in which we blend what's said around culture with an economic edge to it into that strategy itself will hopefully do both the thing of creating a clear narrative which external funders can buy into, but also influence the way in which local organisations are working within that agenda. And again, not to labour this point, but I guess the unifying concept around this is the extent of connectivity which the culture and creative sector have, and that varies across the geographies of Lancashire. It varies across the scale of the organisations, but that we need to maintain a sector which resonates locally and is still well regarded locally, but also has that national and international profile for audiences and markets. I'll hop through these because I've so just closing in terms of some of the key recommendations. We maintain the ambition to establish a cultural investment board, which can action the recommendations that are made in the document. As the LEP transitions into a new structure, it's highly likely that we will move towards a new business board, which maintains that business voice within the work of the Combined County Authority moving forward, but that board should in and of itself be reflective of culture and the creative industries as an important sector. And we also hope that we continue to monitor the KPIs that are set out within these strategies and ensure that delivery does mirror the ambition that's set out within the document itself. So that is a link to the cultural strategy itself, and I'll leave that with you, and happy to take any questions.
Using my chairman's privilege, I think in terms of our understanding, it's critical that we understand where we've been successful as an organisation in attracting funding, particularly when it comes to the national portfolio organisations. And our members won't necessarily be familiar in the room with what a national portfolio organisation is under the Create It document that's been issued by the Arts Council. But certainly there is an interesting piece to be done, I feel, as one of the key recommendations, to understand a little bit more about the 18 national portfolio organisations that exist within Lancashire, how we've been able to assist them, because we've actually grown the number of NPOs in Lancashire from 9 to 12 to 18. So we have been really successful, and what we want to put in place as part of this strategy is a way of growing the number of NPOs and attracting more funding. And for those that are already on the journey through their kind of 4-year funding cycle, to extend that beyond the kind of 4-year time horizon, and look at how we might work with them and pull more bodies into their kind of ambit. But I think we also need to understand, and this would be a second recommendation, which would be to understand those organisations and where they're located in terms of attracting national heritage lottery funding, but also national lottery community funding. Now, a lot of those are at district council level, but just to understand the kind of footprint of where that funding is coming from. There are 2 or 3 other funding bodies as well that I've mentioned previously, that would be worthwhile understanding. So I wonder whether you could say something about the NPOs, Andy. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. So the work that we did in the last round for pre-NPO, the NPO round is 4 years, and sort of, nobody thinks kind of 6 months before I might like to go down the NPO journey. It is such a mammoth piece of work. Organisations are thinking now for the next portfolio, even though they're only going to be bidding in another 2 years' time. So we started a piece of work with Arts Lancashire, and we very much were trawling around the whole of the county, including Blackpool and Blackburn, and really starting conversations with organisations that were already part of the national portfolio and those that had an ambition to join the national portfolio. Because in essence, what national portfolio funding gives you is a little bit of security. So whilst most organisations would be fully confident at applying for a project grant from the Arts Council, it's just a case of filling in an application form, making sure that you do everything that you've said you're going to do, and any terms and conditions, it's not that complicated. Once you are part of that national portfolio, it does mean a national portfolio. It means everybody playing at the same level, and it is a lot of work, and it is a step change for those organisations who want to join. So we started a piece of work which we also collaborated with Creative Lancashire on, and that piece of work was to look at all the different aspects of organisational development and delivery that the organisations would need to think about. And we got in national experts. We just didn't call on our local intelligence. We trawled nationally. And as a result, there are many more organisations that said for the first time, we are really interested in bidding, which is, that's a good sign in itself, because sometimes it can be so off-putting that people have counted themselves out before they've really considered it. And so more people were willing to start into that sort of, yes, we are interested in bidding. And we went through a whole series of training that we did collaboratively. And for the first time, organisations, NPOs actually collaborated with one another to bring everybody's level up. So even those that in the end didn't bid for the NPO or weren't successful, actually they were much better positioned by the end of it. You know, that is an ongoing piece of work. You can't say it's a tick box and we're finished. That is very much an ongoing piece of work. You know, the investment now that comes into the county is much more of a level that we would expect, but there's still a way to go. Of those ones within the national portfolio, we'd definitely like to see some with a higher degree of funding, and we'd still like to see more organisations coming into the organisation. But it is certainly since 2023, 22-23, I think with the work that we've done around Lancashire Culture and Sport Fund, the work that we've done with Arts Lancashire, those things have made a vast difference in our success as a whole county of that Pan Lancashire area.
Don't start many sentences with to give Nadine Dorris her credit, but to give Nadine Dorris her credit, she actually did fundamentally use the MPO process to do some levelling up. And you know that there are 3 tiers here. You can be dropped, which is potentially catastrophic for organisations, as we've seen the English National Opera, who are, I think you'd say, are effectively being forced to relocate for continued funding. We got a substantial number of new entrants and people who are in effectively a preparation stage for MPO sustainability and funding. But there's also an interim class where your MPO can be continued at standstill level, which, given the rate of inflation at the moment, is effectively a sort of cut in your funding. So it is that sort of full spectrum knowledge of who's potentially banked on continued MPO funding, but has probably not got it at the level they wanted. So it's great to get more people in, but it's also good to consolidate the organisations we think have got real growth potential. So it's not just simply the more the better, it is that the organisations are really getting the investment that they need.
Yeah, really briefly, it's really good to hear the work that you've done, Heather, from Cultural Services in Lancashire to give advice and to help prospective MPOs. Also, we heard from Andy that within your section, you have an officer again doing the same sort of thing. And we do know the growth of the MPOs over the recent past there. So I'll just make the comment that it may be surprised some members, the work that has been done both in cultural services and again in Andy's section to assist people. My experience is, of course, you can do all that. A lot of the successful MPO recipients also have to do work themselves, and a lot of them do have staff that are well tuned to making the applications. I just make those comments for the moment. Yeah.
I mean, again, there's an impressive amount of work that goes on behind the scenes that we're not aware of as county councillors, and I thought that it's important today to kind of let members know about this. You know, I mean, certainly the money that is attracted nationally is an awful lot more than we can provide currently in our current guise as a county council. I mean, Arts Council gave the current crop of NPOs £10.1 million, an additional £10.1 million, which is a 59.1% increase in what they had before, and that is largely through the work that's done in the background with the council officers coaching and mentoring and helping them with business plans. Charlie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's just so refreshing to hear what amazing work that's been done. So can I echo the comments of the cabinet member about what an amazing job you guys are doing, first and foremost. One of the things that strikes me in both the old strategy and the new strategy is there's a lot of things that aren't covered and that aren't picked up and that we as an organisation aren't aware of, that are great cultural assets in a community that we just don't know about. Sometimes that's through the fault of the organisers because they're too busy putting the thing on than trying to reach out to us. And some of it's down to the fault of us because they don't feel like there's anyone at the council they can talk to. The example I'd always give is Morecambe Music Festival. You know, that now reaches like 15,000 people of a weekend in the summer. So I wonder if there's a way in which we could tap into that local knowledge of cultural events that councillors have themselves. So I wonder if there's a way in which we could use I'm sure everyone around the table will have similar examples where maybe we could reach out to councillors and see about local community stuff that's happening in their areas that maybe they can help feed into the strategy. That was my first point. I've got a couple, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
I'll just to butt in. One of the other recommendations I was going to make was that we ought to ask the officers to look at the local plans and or core strategy documents produced by the districts, which has a big section on culture in which you'll find some of that information about the big festivals. Also, you're absolutely right, and that is another piece of work that we ought to kind of recommend, which is a directory of festivals which appear to be, you know, growing like topsy right across Lancashire, and you know, there are an awful lot of them of varying sizes and kinds and, dare I say, quality as well. And a lot of the funding that comes through the Lancashire Culture and Sport Fund are from festival type events, small festival type events. So yeah, you're absolutely right there, Charlie. So go on.
Thank you. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. I really liked in the presentation the mention of improved crossover. And I wanted to just give a very brief anecdote of exactly where this could help. Working with an individual event, they're primed to get sponsorship from it's a music event that could really benefit from getting sponsorship in through one of these agencies that can help put Hendrick's Gin as one of the sponsors of the event. The problem that they had, the barrier that they had was, as an individual organisation, they didn't have the upfront capital to be able to pay for that consultancy, which would have paid for itself 5 times over in what they could have got from the sponsors. So I wonder if there's a way in which we can maybe work on a package of support for these kind of events, where we can kind of say, we'll cover the cost for 10 events. And we'll try and leverage in the sponsorship for, it might benefit event 1 might be able to get Argos to sponsor that, and event 3 might be able to get Starbucks, and event 2 didn't get anything, but at least there's some equity in, you know, how we're coming about that. So I don't know if that's something that could be maybe considered. I don't know if I've described it well enough there, but I know the cultural people in the room will know the kind of consultancies that they're talking about. And I think that's a barrier. One event doing it on their own, but if we could pool numerous events to get that same kind of outcome, that'd be really helpful. I wanted to just mention Morecambe Winter Gardens. I think they are an absolute champion of leveraging money from elsewhere. I would love to see them as a national portfolio organisation in the future. And they have used, I think, in the last couple of years, the support from Lancashire County Council's culture team to be a catalyst and a driver and a support function for their fundraising efforts. So I think they're a really good example of what can happen if you work with the council to achieve your aims, which are ambitious, but they're going to have a massive effect on the area. I just have one more final point which I wanted to make. I saw a little quote in the House of Lords the other day. You mentioned who you quoted. I'm going to quote Lord Bragg, who said, "The arts aren't the cherry on the cake, they are the cake." And they're not a nice to have thing. And previous administrations of this council have treated culture as a bit of an extra, where the judges' lodgings in Lancaster, the museum was shut down, other museums, other libraries were shut. So I'd just like some reassurance today that in this new cultural strategy, that no venues that provide cultural, much needed cultural activity in communities will be closed moving forward. Is that a yes?
Take it as read, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, you talked quite a lot about organisation development, capacity building, and I just wondered where the third sector fitted into all this, particularly when we're talking about engaging with local communities, we're talking about cultural diversity, inclusion. Is it still a top-down approach, or are we talking about real bottom-up engagement, and we're talking about building the capacity of voluntary and third sector organisations as well as part of the strategy, if we are going to be successful in encouraging people across Lancashire to engage in our activities? Thank you.
Can I pick up on that? Very much that is the approach of the Lancashire Culture and Sport Fund. When right from its inception, we didn't want this to be a fund that was purely accessible to those organisations that were fully capable of making an application to any other funder anywhere. We wanted this to try and reach grassroots, and that is definitely a work in progress, because I think as Councillor Edwards alluded to earlier, there's always more work to do to uncover another organisation in a locality that you didn't know about. So we have done an awful lot of work, but that is very much a work in progress. The Culture and Sport Fund does fund individuals at a small level, recognising that sometimes organisations just maybe don't exist or just don't feel entirely confident at doing fundraising. So where there are key movers and shakers in a community, we have made that possible. And that sort of thing has made, I think one of the first projects that we funded was a local community where a lady in the community had recognised that a lot of people in her vicinity were saying, we'd love to be able to sew, make our own clothes, mend our own clothes, but we don't have a sewing machine. We don't own one. If we had one, we wouldn't know how to use it. And so she kind of said, right, well, I know how to sew. With a few £100, I could buy some extra sewing machines and I could teach all of these people to sew. And that's an ongoing thing that she can then do for free. So she came into the Lancashire Culture and Sport Fund for 3 sewing machines, not a lot of money, but actually that's having a lot of benefit. But we do recognise that, in communities, there is a lot more that we need to do. And we also recognise that in some areas we've been more successful than in others in tapping into local groups. And so that is very much a work in progress, but those things are at the top of our agenda.
Just briefly on that, talking about, a small development, I'm looking at the potential from that to then think about potential employment opportunities, even business, right? And where do we go from there? And that's, I think, the overall targets that we need to be looking at in terms of our outcomes. And the engagement process will be really useful to look at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I think it sort of leads on from what Yusuf was saying. I think you mentioned connectivity, and it's something that I picked up because you've mentioned there's a need for connectivity right across Lancashire on events, because arts and culture is also about sharing diversity. And I mentioned this at our briefing yesterday, that there are particularly significant events that celebrate culture from different regions of the world, South Asia, for example, in Preston, the Mela. So how do we share that within Lancashire? And I was looking at, because what's missing from the strategy, I felt, was that there are areas that may not have that knowledge and experience of celebrating and knowing about that particular culture. So in that way, if it was sort of shared across Lancashire, particularly significant events, it gives the opportunity for particular areas, very rural areas, that don't have that. And it's like an exchange, really. So I felt that was important to raise the understanding and profile of the diversity within Lancashire. Otherwise, it could be we're just operating in silos and just within our own cultural. So, sorry, have I?
Make that as a recommendation for us to consider when the minority ethnic framework comes back again.
I don't know.
Peter.
Yes, I can sort of respond directly to that, because one thing that we've perhaps touched on is all the work that the leaders have done through the 2050 framework and the proposals within the CCA authority. And if I can just read a paragraph that's in the culture and tourism section of the CCA proposal, is that the proposed CCA will work with government to hold a series of exploratory conversations to test the region's appetite and capacity for partnership working across culture, heritage, sport, communities and the visitor economy. So that sort of encapsulate, hopefully that will encapsulate the sort of concerns you raised, some of the concerns that Charlie raised about this cross Lancashire, pan Lancashire working. And I think that, if you like, encapsulates that in one sort of very concise paragraph. That is definitely the ambition, and working with through the leaders and the districts, and they've got their network, the CPAN, is it the culture, physical and activity network. So that's where all the districts get together. So there is sort of these networks at various levels. It's trying to bring everything together, and this is a way of sort of framing that in a cohesive sort of approach. So hopefully that sort of answered that.
Sorry, that this issue ought to be picked up when the Lancashire Ethnic Minority Partnership is reconsidered, and we ask, I've forgotten his name now, so Sai to consider that as part of his updates. Yeah, and then yeah.
Oh, no.
No.
Peter said it.
Peter said, yeah. So to ask Saeed to consider the role of culture in the production of this minority ethnic partnership.
Come back to that
report. Yeah. Go, Jean, because I know Jean's got to go shortly. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. First of all, the Winter Gardens in Morecambe has been mentioned. Now, clearly, the County Council has been involved there, but I really, really must name check Professor Vanessa Toulmin, who has single-handedly almost moved mountains to make that happen. There were a lot of volunteers involved initially, but she just turbocharged the whole thing, and I really must mention her. Going further, I think we really must dive deeply into publicising a directory of festivals that has been mentioned, because that is where a major economic output will come. People not just doing an afternoon trip to see our amazing mills, which are world class and absolutely unique, and all the other unique things that we have. But if people come for a festival, they're much more likely to stay over for the weekend. So we don't fully clock up the role that retail and hospitality play in are cultural spin-offs. People come to see an amazing exhibition, event, whatever, and that really turbocharges an entire district for a day, hopefully for a weekend, maybe even a long bank holiday weekend. This is just so critical. And whenever I read about the economic impact of culture, it's always, always, always understated. It's so important. And, you know, we have a cost of living crisis. Every single job counts.
Yeah, thank you. Coming from Hindman, obviously, we have a Howard Art Gallery, which is probably one of the important venues that people right across Lancashire, even beyond, actually visit. And I think over the last few years, Mr. Mayor has just pointed out that it has increased the amount of footfall that actually goes through with the Tiffany's glass and various other items that are in there. And over the last couple of years, we also have, making use of the UK Prosperity Fund, made some money available for holding some cultural events, music events and various other events. And that alone attracted a number of visitors right across Northwest. We had I think Oak Fest was an event where a musical event was held. And that event attracted quite a number of audiences right across Northwest, and we had local performers. People came from within Lancashire or just above the border of Manchester. So the economic benefits are, as mentioned, is far greater and more important for local economies and places like Hindman and various other places, and culture and cultural events actually just added on to that. I think just picking up on some of the BME, communities concerned. I think individually, every single strategy or a report needs to include, rather than having a BME, separately, it needs to be included within those larger, reports. Because we're part and parcel of, I would say the BME community is part and parcel of the community as a whole. They have they bring in diversity, but it needs to be included within all reports rather than just one particular thing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for a very interesting report. I particularly like the idea of the Culture Investment Board to bring everything together. Great idea. My question relates to Preston Guildhall, or the loss of. As you're probably aware, Preston Guildhall has been the centre of culture for many years, up until recently, where lots of operas, pantos, theatre was produced. The footfall into Preston was massive during those years of putting on those shows. And when I speak to people in Preston now, everyone says the same thing, is what has happened to our culture in Preston, because it's become a desert. We don't have sufficient of the types of events that we used to have. The Guildhall used to fund them. And I think it's very sad. We're losing a lot of footfall to Liverpool and Manchester, to some of the big events. Now, I appreciate that's largely due because they are large events, such as the Bridgewater Hall. They can take capacity is greater. But we really need to focus on this. Preston is a centre and great communications for culture, but it needs to bring people in. And I'm just wondering if the officers had any update on the situation of the Guildhall, or anything that might replace it to provide those events for the future.
From my understanding, it's not a county council
it's
responsibility, the ownership and the running of the Guildhall. So
City Council.
it's a city council. So maybe that's a question to raise.
Yeah, I appreciate it's a Preston City Council issue, but I'm wondering what sort of input as a county council we can have to try and look at ideas and bring it together, perhaps as part of the investment advisory board, so that we get a venue there that is suitable to provide those events again.
We do work with Preston City Council quite closely. We are working with them on the Harris development, and at the moment that is a big focus, because obviously that's a really ambitious piece of work, drawing in an incredible budget into the city centre. We have had some conversations with the City Council around the Guildhall. I mean, from those, we have put some events into the Guildhall, obviously before the rack issue was identified. At that point, obviously, the City Council weren't able to run that as a full-time venue. However, we did negotiate with them to be able to run some events there, because it is such a brilliant venue for Preston. So we did run the Lancashire Choir of the Year competition there, and obviously audiences were really delighted to be in the Guildhall back again. And we've also run from there a funding fair, which was for community organisations to come and meet a cross-section of funders from across the Northwest and nationally, so that they could sit down, rather than having an email conversation, could actually sit down and have some surgeries and say, we want to do this. Obviously, the issue of RAC is sort of unknown at this point, but we will continue to work with the City Council on any of their plans across the city.
From the officers, they got some good reports. Yeah.
Two very quick points before you move on to the next section. Over the last year, Marketing Lancashire has moved into the County Council, so is now part of my service area. So that really does build on your point around how events themselves can act as visitor attractions, can increase the dwell time and increase the economic impact of those events. It's really important we measure that properly, and things need to be of a certain scale to actually do that. In terms of cultural representation, I'd also sort of flag the example of something like the Textile Biennial, which by its very subject matter means that it touches the Southeast Asian and the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, given that it takes a view on the full cycle of production and deployment of sort of cotton and other materials, and we've been able previously as the LEP to invest in those elements of that programme that took place outside of Blackburn to ensure that it had that really good cultural reach embedded within it. So maybe we don't need to grow as many things, but we need to ensure, as the point County Councillor Dad made, was that where we are investing, that they do have a strong cultural and diverse component to them.
Final one word is, if you want to know a little bit more, then subscribe to the Visit Lancashire, because you get regular updates of what's happening across Lancashire, and that's from Marketing Lancashire. So that's a good place.
Recommendation which I'd like to make. There are a lot of advocacy organisations out there, and maybe the officers can bring back a report about the role played by Visit Lancashire, Arts Lancashire, Creative Lancashire, et al. Yeah. So we'll move on to the
Okay, we're going to have some slides that you can look at while I talk. I won't take as long as Andy did. You've got a report there. So we were Heather and I, we were set an exam question. What is culture? What's its impact? And particularly what's its impact around young people, place, the economy? So we've done our essay, and you'll see the way we've set it out is that we've started off and tried to sort of explain that Within Lancashire County Council, we have cultural services, and cultural services is Lancashire Council's embodiment of culture. So, you know, we are LCC's culture. Thank you. The report starts off and sort of describes that we have a really, really wide definition of culture, and it's very, very inclusive. So it's not just highbrow, you know, opera, Royal Opera House. It's everything. It's down to the grassroots, you know, we want to have the broadest kind of definitions as we can. Okay, yeah, thanks. So you can see we've listed, we've got, you know, sort of a long list there, but we're not saying that's exhaustive. The report then tries to give lots of examples and illustrations of how Lancashire County Council's cultural services provides a cultural offer to the residents of Lancashire and also the people coming into the county through all our different services and teams. So we asked each of the services and teams to sort of you know, come up with, you know, what are the things that you've done and you're doing that are there for that cultural offer for residents and people coming into the county. So that's what the report has done. It's explained about cultural services, who we are. It's given a broad definition of how we see as culture. It's then gone on to each area of sort of young people, of communities and place, of the economy, and how we are delivering in all sorts of ways, and giving lots of examples, not exhaustive examples, but, you know, just some examples. We are within Lancashire County Council, but we are very much outward thinking. We get a lot of inward investment into the county. We do lots of match working, whether that's working with people or small monies of match, which then leverage in lots higher monies. We work very closely with various kind of non-government departments that have been mentioned, such as the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and Arts Council England, the National Heritage Lottery Fund, Department for Education. You might be surprised, give us £1.7 million each year to our music service. That's a big chunk of money. National Trust, we've grown a much closer relationship with them as well. So we work with partners at a very, very local level. You know, so your library will have partners with its local surgery, or its parish council, or its local charity, or its voluntary, you know, working with the voluntary sector, but also as a family, because we call ourselves a family of teams and services that make up this big family. We work with those national organisations as well. So, you know, see the report, you can, you know, read for yourself, but that's how we've come back to you to explain what we do and what impact we have. And we've tried to give some quantitative examples and some qualitative examples. So I probably can open up for questions, really, or comments.
I think there's some great material in this report, particularly about how you help educational services. And one of the things that was mentioned yesterday is that really we ought to refer this report to Sue Hines' Education, Children and Families Committee for her committee to report on it. She might want to liaise with you to provide some further information about kind of where things are going and how much is being spent, that kind of thing.
Thank
But
you.
I think that would be useful.
Yes,
And also the impact that it's having. Yeah. Sorry. Any questions? So Yusuf and then Sue.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, looking at this and you talk about young people, my only concern is around how do you engage with those young people that are excluded from education and other training and other services. So I'm just wondering, because we've got a lot of young people out there on the streets, you know, there's a lot of antisocial behaviour. How do we engage with those young people and ensure that they're part and parcel of what you do?
Well, I would say that our colleagues in children and family wellbeing do a lot of that work. So we're part of the same directorate. So they do a lot of that work with people who aren't accessing school for one reason or another. And our education improvement colleagues also. I think in terms of a good example, I think really is in terms of libraries. Libraries are very, very tolerant and try and, you know, work with young people who might not be attending school. A lot of the schooling happens in some of the library spaces, you know, where they're rebuilding that, getting used to going back to school. So they'll meet with a tutor in our library spaces. Sometimes our young people, their behaviour becomes too intense because, you know, we've got to remind them you can't swear and you know, whatever. But our library spaces are used by a lot of tutors with children, but our children and family wellbeing services and our education improvement services are doing a lot around, you know, what you're asking.
Chair, if I can just comment, I think the first thing Steve mentioned then should not be underestimated. When I first took over as cabinet member, I think it was 6-7 years ago, library services was part of the highways directorate. That, as part of the sort of officer reorganisation, that then become part of the children's and services, and with the same exact director, and so there's a lot more cohesion between the different services. So exactly the point you were saying, Yusuf, was sort of taken on board, that whole holistic approach and involving with the schools, the school library service and all those sorts of areas as well. So there's a lot of interconnection work between the different areas.
So sorry, I was just going to say, Councillor Latella as well. People might be surprised to know we've got about 120 young people who volunteer in our libraries. I think it's pretty unique in the country. And of course, young people, they grow older and they go to university or get a job, and we've got to keep recruiting. But we seem to be maintaining 120 across our, and they do things like help with Lego Club on a Saturday morning. And you might have a member of staff who's wouldn't be able to do that Lego Club because they're having to serve customers, and then families can come in. Just thought you might want to, you know, you've got young people and young people for something to do. And what happens when that young person's volunteered? It doesn't look absolutely brilliant on their CV, doesn't it? And it gives them skills about interacting with people, etc. And we call them culture hacks, and they get their own T-shirt. They get their own T-shirt, and they, you know, and they get little prizes for how many hours they do and such like.
Sorry, I was itching to talk there. Sorry. We recognise that across libraries, you know, at the younger end, we have no trouble at all getting children through our doors. You know, you promised a child a sticker, and you know they're there, aren't they? You know, and obviously at the adult end, you know, adults understand the value of libraries, and you know, we are always looking at how we increase our engagement with young people. And you know, the cultural sector across the country would say the same thing. You know, it's the age group that people sort of say we should be working more with. One of the things that we are doing there is there was some DCMS funding available for a scheme called Know Your Neighbourhood. And that scheme was for people of all ages that were at risk of social isolation. And there's a lot of research that currently shows that although young people might be connected through phones, they're actually recording, you know, a generation that are the least connected of any. They're most likely to suffer social isolation. So we are doing some work with Blaze, which was an organisation that we set up coming out of the Cultural Olympiad, you know, many years ago, 2012, to look at research with children and young people that don't currently access the library, to say, what is it that we could be doing more of to enable you to feel welcome in the library and there's a relevant offer for you. So that is a piece of work that's taking place at the moment.
I thought you'd forgotten me. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I do a Saturday surgery at Clitheroe Library, so I can vouch for what Stephen said about young people helping with Lego and so on. It's great to see them there. My question is linked a little bit to Yusuf's. We seem to have been focusing on the intrinsic value and standalone value of culture, but the other half of the coin is the sports fund, and I think that this can link in with diversionary activities for young people to steer them away from antisocial behaviour. Last week I met with a youth worker in Clitheroe, and he described to me that they used to have theatrical productions at the youth zone, but it needs more funding to restore that sort of thing. So I just looking for more funding, really.
Thank you, Jed. Excuse me, because I'm not used to this committee, so it might be a bit of a daft question. I've been looking, I didn't realise about this fund, and I certainly recognise some of it that has gone on in my area, such as sound skills, which is fantastic. But my question leads on from Sue's really about it. I represent an area which meets all this criteria. You know, the underrepresented, there's got lots of antisocial behaviour, but they haven't got the grassroots sports there. They haven't got. So can you lift an area from the complete bottom, if you know what I mean? We've got a couple of really good voluntary community groups. They're not aware of this funding. So like, I know a lady who has set up a sewing machine group, but we didn't know about this. And I'm doing, hopefully soon, a neurodiverse Lego club for children. I mean, but what is there for, like, apart from the family hub, I don't know what there is in our area that could do anything.
Well, I mean, I don't, do we want to move to the Culture and Sport Fund, Chair, or? Okay, so can we, Councillor Hindle, can we come back to you? You're a Preston, aren't you? Realty, yeah. I'm a Prestonian, so I'll probably know your area very well. Well, I do.
It is really to also, if we're talking a little bit about the physical activity side or the sports side, which you refer to there, we do quite a bit of work with Active Lancashire as well. That is another sort of partner in this sort of sphere. I would say our relationship with both Arts Lancashire and Active Lancashire has grown tremendously over the past couple of years. And I think this sort of communication between all these different organisations with our sort of support, because when they go out to sort of apply for grants, we can put a letter of endorsement. I've done that before to get some support for an organisation as cabinet member. And it just is that sort of cohesive, you know, Lancashire approach forward. They've got their particular skill sets, we've got our responsibilities, but between the sort of fact that we are talking, I mean, Heather, you as officers meet on a very regular basis. So, you know, these things aren't in isolation. So even though as a county council, it might not be our statutory duty to do these things, then we are making sure that these things do happen in the round.
Thanks, Chair. Youth clubs, are they out of favour at the moment? We have one in Accrington, and I'm floored if I can think of the name of it. But it used to be very, very active at one time with a lot of youngsters getting involved. But these days it seems to be very, very quiet, and I don't know whether there's any funding left or whether it's stopped. But we don't seem to be having much luck in doing anything to bring the youngsters in at all.
I mean, youth clubs isn't really part of the cultural services what I'm responsible for. It's more children and family wellbeing, so we can take away to sort of ask our children and family wellbeing colleagues to respond what's happening in the Hindman area around kind of youth, you know, provision to so kind of teenage years. Yeah. Okay.
Within cultural services, also the outdoor education. I don't know if you want to touch on that side of it, which is slightly different to what we're meaning, but it does address some of that sort of physical activity.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, we'll have to take that away and to sort of ask our colleagues who deliver those services.
I just want to mention, I used to be youth and community worker working with ex-offenders and young people at risk, particularly within the inner cities. And I used to develop programs, diversionary programs, to take young people away from crime, criminal activity, antisocial behaviour, whatever it might be. The biggest problem we've had is that things have moved away from youth clubs. I mean, I used to teach table tennis at Lancashire Standard, an England standard, many years ago. In fact, somebody sent me a photo from God knows when it was. Must have been when I was 16. But you know, when we played at Preston and West Lancs and across Chorley as well, we had competitions. We had 7 leagues and in total 16, because we had East and West. But things have moved on, things have changed, and we have lost a lot of that youth inclusion program. But it's something that we might need to consider moving forward.
It's going to be very interesting to your report, because your report will answer some of these questions, as Andy said. Just an observation on culture. Again, Steve gave definition of culture. There's so many definitions. I think the big thing for the county, we've seen loads of figures, how many people work in cultural industries and what is the value to the economy. I think most of those figures are very understated. Yeah. I think we all know, delving down, there's a lot of people working in cultural industries. There's a massive benefit to the economy. Maybe at some time somebody somewhere will have a better picture of that, because that's a really good news story. I won't ask him about the music service. We've not mentioned that. I know that's doing really good work. I'm hoping at the end of this meeting, when we've heard the last component part, which is really yours, Heather, that we've made some recommendations. The chair's actually alluded to those now, that we can then, as Peter said at the beginning, make some assistance and some recommendations to be taken when you're doing the refresh of the cultural strategy. I take it that is the object of this issue today. And maybe in the next work programme, which has to be decided by the Scrutiny Management Panel, maybe we return to culture in 6, 8, 10 months, some more issues. I just thought I'd make those observations, but I think I'm very much like to hear from Heather now on this next report.
So just before, not a recommendation, but if we are donating a lot of brass instruments to schools, you know where I'm going with this, Peter. We do have a choir competition. Can we think about a school brass band competition?
You're doing it.
Yeah. Can we think about that? Yeah. Can we think about also maybe commissioning somebody to write a test piece for us as part of that competition framework? I think that
You're automatically disenfranchising the string players, woodwind players, and percussion.
I would just like to share with members that last year our Lancashire Music Service Young Brass Band came second in the national competition, which we were very chuffed about.
So the Lancashire Culture and Sport Fund, delivered through Crowdfund Lancashire, was set up at the end at the end of a piece of work which Councillor Buckley had identified crowdfunding as a new mechanism that a lot of local authorities were looking at. And before we embarked, I suppose I just want to give a little bit of background. Before we embarked on any of this, we did a lot of research and a lot of benchmarking with other local authorities. So we spoke to initially Kent about their experience, and then with at least a handful of other local authorities across the country. And Sunderland was one that I was really interested in, because I was interested in how crowdfunding could work when, you know, we're in a situation where we've got a cost of living crisis, and, you know, how is it that we can encourage people to do that individual giving in that context. And I was really heartened by the experience of Sunderland and their ability to leverage in other big funders who recognise that in taking part in culture and sport, those things have a very real benefit to people's well-being. It isn't just that somebody might go to an event and have a nice time on the day. You know, those people are connecting with other people. You know, there is such an added benefit from being part of these things. A part of these things as a community, but also, you know, coming together just, you know, as a new participant, as somebody new to the area, how important these both small events and large festivals are across the county. We were also interested to know how those potentially with less digital access could also be part of a scheme like this. And, you know, we've been really mindful of that all the way along. And I think, as has come up in the conversation previously during today, you know, there are groups that exist out there, but often some of those groups might not have a constitution, they might not have the wherewithal, you know, they certainly might not have a bank account and stuff like that. And those are things that we felt were very important, that we shouldn't say that those groups can't apply. But what we did say is we need to work with those groups to make sure they have got a constitution. You know, they are a fit for purpose organisation that can fund, and that we needed to be able to support those organisations. So there are several organisations in the list of people that we have supported that didn't exist before they came to this fund. You know, they might have existed in the sense that, you know, if I went running, I might then be joined by a handful of other people, and we might start to call ourselves the Wire Running Club, even though we had no constitution. What we have been doing is to make sure that those people have a constitution, you know, have a, you know, legal setup that enables them to have a bank account, and that they are able to manage that money effectively and potentially draw down other funding. Sorry, thank you. So we started the process in March 2022 when just after the funding had been agreed, and we went through the procurement process and secured a contract with an organisation called Space Hive. And Space Hive is one of the leaders within the country working on this idea of communal sports funding, sports or culture funding that has a local authority or a big partner as part of it. And the idea is that rather than people going alone with crowdfunding, which a lot of people do, however, you are something like 60% more likely to reach your target if you're part of a platform such as Crowdfund Lancashire. Because when people come to our platform, they might start to look at the project that they were interested in, but there will be an element of reflected glory. They'll look at other projects and think, I really like the sound of that. I will also pledge to those. So we started off, we opened in November 2022. And we did a whole host of sessions across the county, online and face-to-face. We did a lot of drop-in sessions at community centres, at libraries, etc. And we spoke to around 800 people about the fund. And it was great, because a lot of those people who weren't part of the existing funding structures kind of went, actually, I can really see how I could fit into this. So our first deadline was at February 2022, and we had an incredible number of applicants in that first round with a whole scale of projects. So as I said before, there were projects that were just a couple of £100 right through to projects that were aiming to raise around £50,000. Following that round, we had a subsequent round that was in summer, and we're in our third round now. So how we get the message out is always a work in progress, and we will never tick the box to say that that's done, because there will always be groups that we need to reach. We have been through local authorities, through CVSs, through culture and sport organisations, through contacts with community groups, Lancashire Cultural Network, the Culture and Physical Activity Network that was identified, and really tried to get that message out, going through organisations such as the Lancashire FA, to get that message out to grassroots clubs. So, so far we have had 82 successful projects. And when we say successful, that means that those people have met their funding target. So they might have said, we want to raise £5,000 to make our changing rooms fully accessible. Or it might be that with the rise of girls teams within football, for example, actually we need to make sure that our changing rooms are, able to have girls teams as well as boys teams, sort of really trying to give, open out culture and sports for all people across Lancashire. So a group might set their target, and then they'll start that fundraising journey. And as part of that fundraising journey, the County Council will consider support towards those projects. And there are 82 projects that have met their target, so have been able to go ahead and deliver their projects. So the total that has been spent so far is just over 544,000. And that money has then leveraged in another 838,000 from other sources. So that's a mix of organisations such as the Arts Council, it might be a National Lottery Heritage Fund, or it might be businesses and individuals. So there's a whole raft of people that might give to this. And we were very keen at the outset to speak with big funders such as Arts Council to say, how can organisations make this work for them as part of a portfolio? Because often match funding is a requirement of things like an Arts Council bid. And so from the get-go, we worked with those big funders to make sure that we could do that. Okay, so in addition to the online funding, organisations can do what is called offline funding. So, for instance, when we spoke with Sunderland, they spoke, with a lot of conviction about the work that, say, they were doing with working men's clubs. And they were saying, well, actually, a lot of these people are definitely not online. If you said to them, go online and just do your online banking and transfer some money, it wouldn't happen. But actually, if you put a pint pot on the bar and say, actually, today we are fundraising for this, please give whatever change you can afford, then one person at the end of the night can upload that as an offline pledge. So that is the way that, so organisations, if they're doing a coffee morning or things like that, quiz night, they can use that funding as what's called an offline pledge, which does enable people that might not, be able to, do crowdfunding through their phone or might not have a laptop, still to give to these good causes. So the work that we've been doing, we've had projects in all the districts, and each project has, we've had a lot of projects that have been culture or sport, or culture and sport. What we are continually looking at is, in relation to those groups that are funding, who are we not seeing coming through? And, if we're not seeing them coming through, what more can we do to make this fund more accessible to everyone to be part of?
So just to finish off, I want to say that we were tasked, County Council Buckley said, look, I've got this idea, tasked us to go away. We went away, we've implemented it. We think it's a successful fund. We think it's working well, but it's over to you to make comments about it.
I just wanted to just talk about the recommendations. Thank you. The fund is amazing. It's brilliant. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. The only problem I've just got is I think that recommendation 2 and 3 are the same thing. I just don't think they're very well worded. If I'm honest, I don't even think that they're necessary. I think you could probably incorporate that into one and say to continue to reach Lancashire residents and community groups in more areas, including targeting underrepresented communities. I don't think that you need to have 2 and 3. I think that it muddles the water. I also don't think that you should prioritise projects in low income areas specifically, because all areas of Lancashire have people on low incomes that could benefit from these projects. Are we turning away a sewing club in Knott End, even though it might have the exact same effect of a sewing club in Ribbleton? So I just think we just need to be really careful on the wording. Happy to submit my thoughts in writing if that is clearer for people before the recommendations go through. I just think it's just a bit clunkily worded. I don't have any comments to say about what you guys are doing because it's amazing, and I've got to go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I can't get my head around this. I've probably not read it in detail. It's just around the funding. How do you allocate? And is there specific criteria of allocation to projects on funding? What is it based on? What percentage do they get? And could I just ask, is that the 544, the total amount of funding that we have to allocate? So double question, sorry.
I'll answer the final bit first. The 544 is what we put in our budget last February. Well, when I first launched this, it was a February 22 budget. When I launched this, when we pledged that £500,000 crowd fund would go, we pledged that as part of our MTFS going forward. So we've got this as a budget. So it's not just a one-off initiative to get 1 year's worth of grants and that's it, sort of wipe your hands and move on to the next thing. What I really wanted to do was, as we talked about in I think the first item with Andy, was about some sort of sustainable growing up the sort of net base of culture, sport activity, get people involved. And whilst I've just got the microphone, I think one of the things I'm most pleased about the outcome, not just the leveraging in, that it's for every £1 we put in, there's another £1.50 we get back. I say we get back, the community receives, because the thing I'm most pleased about and proud about this is the engagement within the community. So it's not just grants going out to an organisation, it's the fact that those organisations have to engage with the communities. There is that sort of social buy-in and ownership of the project, so they feel invested in what they're doing, not just the organisers but the community as a whole. And I think that's really important, because then as Heather mentioned, as part of the process, we help them through the bid writing process, so they don't always have to just sort of write to the county council or local members grant or whatever it is. They've now got the tools to get extra support from elsewhere, and I think that's really beneficial for the wider community.
Thank you, Chair. Fantastic work that's being done, and I would encourage sport for all. I mean, great for mental health and everything else, and you've done some fantastic work on that. I'm just wondering, and apologies if it's been discussed before, but have you considered, or do you have any sports or celebrity mentors that the county could get involved with to promote the many different sports now that are popular in Lancashire, and particularly with the crowdfunding aspect as well, which is a great way to raise awareness and funds. But we look at the likes of famous celebrities in here, like the Freddie Flintoffs and people who've worked hard with cricket. There are people in all different sports in Lancashire that might be able to take part in that and enhance the reputation of the whole county in terms of sport and culture. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that. In terms of, if you like, sporting ambassadors, within, going back to something again, Andy said, within Marketing Lancashire, there are Lancashire sporting ambassadors, and Freddie Flintoff is one of those. So we do have those connections. In terms of actual engaging with wider sport, our partnership with Active Lancashire, they're the people who have got most connections, the networks within the various sporting arenas. It's not something officers here would necessarily have that expertise in. So we use our partners who are in that arena, who are best placed, and they do an excellent job. And I think, like I said earlier, our sort of relationship with these external partners is much improved, and long may that continue.
Sorry, just need to come back to Councillor Carter. I don't think we answered your question properly. People decide on their project how much they think they need to do what they want to do, and then they'll have. So we just have 2 people running this fund. So it's not loads of officers. It's just 2 officers, and they one's not even full time, and they will talk to the person whose idea. So in your neck of the woods, they might be talking to the people in Ashton Park with the grow, the flamingo, or the ones that do the growing in where the former bowling green is, or in I don't know which, the Brookfield one. So they'll talk with the people and they'll say, right, okay, what's your project? And they'll try and help them, won't they? And they'll sort of say, well, we think we need this amount of money, and they'll sense check that through. And so they don't want them to go off and to be failing. So the officers give them a lot of advice. And then if do you want to work through, just talk it slightly through, Heather?
Okay, so as a community organisation, the maximum that they could be awarded with is £20,000 currently, which would be no more than 50% of their total. That in itself is quite ambitious, because that would mean that as an organisation they were trying to raise £40,000. If an organisation was coming to us as a first time fundraiser, we would suggest they start off on something a little bit more realistic first, because it's an awful lot to raise. So as Steve has said, we work with that organisation to try and make something realistic and necessary. And the organisation goes through a verification process with Space Hive, and that means that everything is in place, so that actually if the money is awarded, the project can go ahead. So it's things like planning permission and all of those things that if an organisation hasn't necessarily thought about it, you don't want them to get to the end of the fundraising journey and go, we can't do it anyway. So we make sure all of those steps are in place. So we talk with that group. We make sure that group is sort of framing it around something that's realistic for them to fundraise for. And we also work with the local authority. So, for instance, we talk with Preston City Council and say, right, we've had a number of bids come through from Preston. At that stage, they'll be live on the platform. We'd really like you to look at them, and we'd really like you to, offer us any insights, from your point of view, and it's so that they might come back and generally they say it's a brilliant organisation, a lot of track record. What they haven't said about themselves is because they always really undersell themselves. Brilliant organisation, always engaging lots of people, always doing really valuable work on the ground. And that's very useful information for us to say, because if you're brilliant at fundraising and have done it for a long time, you're very used to blowing your own trumpet. If you're a grassroots organisation, you're just doing what you do because you think it's necessary. And actually it's very useful to get that officer insight from the local authorities. So we look at those projects, and we look at the number of projects coming from each area, and what they cover, and we go to the cabinet member and the head of service with the list of projects. Now, sometimes if the number of projects that are coming to us is like more than the amount that we have available in that round, then we might not fund all projects to 50%. Some projects we might kind of think, actually they're maybe less of a priority. And I suppose the example there is that, you know, if a group comes forward and says, right, our great project is that we need a new boiler, this is not really the right fund for them to come to for a new boiler. You know, that isn't in itself going to increase the amount of culture or sport. They can put their project on our platform, and numerous projects have done that have been fundraising for a new boiler, for example, and they have been successful through being on the platform. So that thing of reflected glory that I said, you know, other people seeing their project, they've been successful, and that's really important that they continue to do so. But obviously that does mean that there are decisions about the scale. So not all projects come in at 50% and that maximum amount. So, you know, there is an amount of discretion in there, but that's always looked at in terms of, you know, priorities and making sure that there's a fair representation of projects.
And Chair,
From Andy's report, he focused on top tier sport. He focused on really, you know, the football league and the immediate pyramid below the football league. He didn't include in his report Chorley FC, which was a source of complaint from Chorley FC when I circulated that report to them, and it doesn't also include a lot of clubs in the next tier of the pyramid, steps 7 and 8, which is the Northern Premier League and the Northern Premier League Northwest. There's an awful lot of clubs in Lancashire within that, you know, division, but there are also an awful lot of sports which aren't covered in that report. So what are the biggest sports in Lancashire outside of football and cricket? Well, there are things like tennis, golf. We have an awful lot of golf, and you know, I have from various golf clubs, I've had applications for members' allowance grants to fund things like benches and all of that kind of thing, or tea urns to, you know, support ladies' days and all of that. So it does get quite interesting, and also diversity as well. Let's not forget that the LET report was very kind of male oriented, and it didn't cover, you know, sport has suddenly, you know, blossomed in a number of areas, you know, women's football, women's rugby, you know. So let's go beyond golf. Tennis is really big in Lancashire. But the things that I get, I don't know how many you've got in your own divisions, but bowling clubs. Each one of my bowling clubs has had some money from me, and I've got three in my division. So we got bowling clubs, cycling clubs, walking clubs. So suddenly, I think we need to do some work in here, and that would be one of my recommendations, to work with the national bodies, i.e. the Football League, Professional Golf Association, the table tennis clubs. There's another one. You know, I regularly give money to the table tennis club in my area. So the more we know, the more we can reach out to these people and go, well, if you want to apply for some funding, you know, you can do. Also, is there a prospect of this size of the fund increasing, Peter, or is that dependent upon Alan?
that's a budgetary matter, which is not my responsibility. Direct responsibility. Have I? In terms of groups, if you look at the back list, I mean, there are netball clubs, there's bowling, there's cricket. It does, but it is those individuals that need to come and you know, request the funding. It's not that we would never turn them away. And I think again, this is where, as county councillors, we've got to be advocates in our own division to recognise where certain needs are. So if you get a request as part of a local members grant, and you think, well, my local members grant doesn't cover it, but actually this is ideal for a crowdfund. Well, that's great. I think there's a nice segue there, because one thing I just to continue where Heather left off, is it's almost like it has become successful. We are getting a lot of grants coming in, and at the moment, the maximum for the organisation is set to £20,000. One of the recommendations within the report, and which is where I'm sort of seeking Scrutiny's sort of opinion on this, is to reduce that to £15,000. It doesn't mean that their projects have to diminish. All we're saying is that our element of the matched funding, we will match fund up to 15,000. If they can raise a lot more, then they can still go ahead with their project. But what that will mean is that because we have got a finite budget within the fund, we do have to put a cap on it, and then we have to sort of lower things down accordingly based on the demand. So if that was the maximum was lower, that would give us more flexibility. So I just want to sort of open that to Collie, rather than it being a sort of cabinet member decision. I thought this was an opportunity to gauge.
But that 15,000, lowering the limit to 15,000, would we all support that? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody seems agreed.
Yeah. I think
that's a good steer from Scrutiny.
Yeah.
So
You
that's what I
got
felt.
that,
But that, you know,
yeah.
it's
I
thank
think
you.
you got that recommendation.
Don't-
Curling.
Like a roof that's required for the running of that community centre, otherwise the footfall wouldn't come in. Is that something, a consideration of a project or not? Sorry.
So for a capital funding thing, we would always ask for some degree of project. So, and I think part of that is because we've been, really cautious around capital projects, because your money could soon get eaten away with capital projects. So if it was very much tied into the development of a group that was going to be meeting or had been stopped from meeting and wanted to do more, then in that sense, it would be, considered. But as a standalone item in itself, it wouldn't, unless it was part of really enabling people to access culture or sport.
I think one example I always like to sort of comment on is for sort of like disabled access. If you've got a facility and there's no ramp or anything like that, you're spending capital money on something, but the net benefit is to involve the community into engaging with sport or culture. Yeah. So it depends on what the ask is.
Recommendation also be that in terms of funding, we also provide advice on other potential sources as well. If people
do that.
People got a
do a lot of
project,
signposting for the two officers.
Yeah.
And one of the officers has joined us from outside of LCC with a lot of experience in this kind of thing, so really good at signposting. So it might be, okay, this fund's not for you, but we know of another fund that we think is for you, and give them all the details.
Yeah, and an example would be on the heating example, is we would signpost perhaps to the Environment Fund and things like that. So there's a lot of signposting.
It's fine. Just wanted to come back. I mean, we were talking about, you talked about around the Guildhall and some of the venues. I mean, I can remember organising events at the Guildhall, business event, major business events, working with our county business as well, including Job Centre Plus and various looking at employment opportunity for people in Lancashire. On top of that, I even helped organise the Commonwealth Games dinner at the Guildhall, a big one for businesses across Lancashire. To try and get the benefit and economic benefit in Preston and Lancashire as well, not just in Manchester because of the wider context of activities. But one of the things I'm keen to see is that what are our links with some of the main stadia that we have, like Preston North End, like Blackburn Rovers, whatever it might be, Burnley, whatever. It's not just about football in the community, it's about using those venues for events. So you could have, outdoor events, you could have major concerts, you could have whatever. And it's about how accessing those venues, and the community would have a greater engagement within the locality, but also from wider afield. And it's something I think we need seriously to consider, but also open it up to everybody. So we're looking at gender, there's no gender bias or whatever. So we're looking at a range of activities. But I'm just wondering how we can tie that all in with the sports facilities that we do have in the region.
Just like Preston North End, because they now have an arm which is Preston North End Education Trust, and which the VCF sector, they work very widely, hold events. We've had many cultural events, so they're working with the community of the Education Trust, and I think Blackburn is the same as well. So I don't know. Yeah.
Just in terms of Preston North End as well, you'll all be pleased to know that the small kind of heritage part with the history of Preston North End are going to be working with the archives. The archives, part of cultural services. I'm going like that because the archives is sort of over there. And we're also working with the National Football Museum. We're going to be doing an exhibition with them. And we're going to be doing something with Preston North End as well, aren't we? Do you want to add as well, Heather?
Yeah, so we do work with quite a few of the football clubs. With Burnley, we work with Burnley FC, and we're doing a big project with them called the Clarets Collected, around doing a collecting of fans, archives, and the development of a real sort of community archive within Burnley Library. And we're doing quite a lot of work with different clubs, including Preston. We're doing a knitting project with them, knitting scarves, all sorts of different things, because, I think all of those big football clubs recognise the need to be linking into the community. We're doing work, as Steve said, with the National Football Museum and the Lancashire FA. But I think it's an interesting point about their venues. And that's something that we'll take away and think about, maybe how we could sort of link into those venues as well as the clubs themselves.
And again, we did use the Invincibles Lounge to launch Brilliant Book Awards, which is, of course, one of our book awards for the school library service, which you should all be advocating for us and making sure all your schools buy into the school library service.
And that type of thing as well in some of these clubs.
I think, I was going to say, but maybe I'm jumping the gun now. I think, we've had an awful lot of information, an awful lot of data. I made the remarks earlier, Peter, at the beginning, we were talking about the refresh there. We obviously want to be of assistance. And I think we've got recommendations pending now the intent is to help the thing along. And I think today we've put the spotlight on other areas. I mean, particularly the figure of the number of people actually working in cultural industries and the value to the county council. If we could perhaps somehow, I don't know how we do it, Peter, if we can actually get a more accurate figure, I think that figure would astonish people. It really would. And I think that's an important thing to keep banging the drum. But I'm suggesting, after Terry, perhaps we just agree the recommendations and then we can all go home.
Excuse me, Chair. Yeah, just to tie in with what things we did with Preston was around creative industries and the link with training and opportunities through the university, and a lot of those initiatives were set up through them as well. So I'm just wondering if we can get the numbers tied up with the university as well, because they were very keen on that development.
You'd expect me to, as former Chief Data Officer of Northwest Development Agency. Now I'll share those with people. I need to do a little bit of work on them. Need to crunch them down a bit further. ONS are about to do their 2022 release, but it won't be until April, which will be exactly the same thing, but updated for 2022. Remember, you're coming out of COVID as well, which has caused all sorts of havoc in terms of reporting of figures on an accurate basis. But yeah, I'll share those with people once I've done a bit more manipulation. Sorry, Terry.
Thanks, Chair. Just one point. I have a local golf club that's not a very rich club, but they've started something with youngsters from a high school, local high school, but they're in need of money for some help with their practice pitch because it's in a poor state. Is anything like that in
Search Crowdfund Lancashire, direct them to the site. There's application forms, there's ways that they can apply. And yeah, those sorts of things, if there's community benefit, and that's what we're trying to do, is to encourage it's groups and individuals and parish and town councils, because they're also included in this.
Getting youngsters into golfing.
Yeah.
There's just one other point. Can you find a few points for Burnley you were talking about? Have you got any at all spare?
How to get funding for people who don't have golf courses and football pitches and
but
but they're internal, aren't they?
yeah. Yeah. But
No,
not really.
no. Well, it's the local. It's for my area. It's me. Where I live, I represent.
You see, we have had individuals who've applied for the thing, and there's an artist who works, I think, across Preston, Ribbleton, Gary, as you, Gary does. Has he been successful getting two? I don't know if anyone last summer walked down the high street down Preston and the BHS and those things. It was, people were stopping, looking at them, talking, and that was a local artist who were helping him, one, pay his mortgage, two, bring a bit of something to Preston, and so.
Thank you, Chair. Just Heather mentioned the sewing group, and I think it was the Barnoldswick, the one that you were referring to. That was just one lady. One lady wanted to deliver sewing classes, and it completely took off. And that's all it takes. We've seen the full spectrum with Andy talking about economic development all the way through, and this is the other end of that. Without the groundwork, we can't do anything. Without that, we can't do Guildhall productions. We can't do any of that because you need the people who are trained, they're passionate, and they're going to do something. So this fund, it does exactly that. It's an entry level thing for so many people, but it doesn't have to be entry level. But it's the way in, and it takes one person, and we can't ever give you that person, And in some ways, I know it might be that you are that person that instigates some sort of change and starts a group. You don't have to be a part of it permanently, but it's a way to get the ball rolling. But without that, nothing will ever do. And the whole thing is about raising the level across Lancashire, and so that we end up with more MPOs and all these different things, because there's more volunteers, there's more people who are skilled in those different areas, more knowledge base, and it all feeds in together to raise the level across the board.
Yeah.
My final comment before we go to the recommendations, if I may, is I think one of Steve's first comments was that cultural services is a big family. And I think with the report and the discussion that we got, I think it's perhaps one area that we can just reflect on, that there is an awful lot of good work, not just within the county council and the officers, us all individually, and we've all got a part to play in that. And our partners, there's tremendous amount of potential there. And like I said before, if we can with that partnership working, bring it closer together, and it's got a great future for it all.
Has them in the room today, like you know, we can move Martins. Okay,
Peter, can I quickly ask? Do we
please,
actually have an understanding of how many of our staff within County Council are engaged in community or voluntary organisations or in voluntary work? Because that might be a good starting point as well.
Misba's going to move the cursor as I'm speaking down him. First, consideration be given to how the County Council can further support, grow and work with our national portfolio organisation holders that exist in Lancashire to attract even more funding, including a breakdown of the rubric contained in the Arts Council England created strategy document, a piece of work to understand where organisations are located and whether they're eligible for National Lottery Heritage funding, National Lottery Community Sports funding and Sports England funding at a district level. Examination of individual district local plans, core strategy documents to better understand their cultural strategies. A report back on the role of advocacy organisations the County Council works with, such as Arts Lancashire, Digital Lancashire, Lancashire Cultural Network and Visit Lancashire. Development of a directory of festivals in Lancashire to be considered, and regard be given to how significant events and festivals are shared wider in Lancashire. Consideration be given to a package of support to be provided for events where we can leverage in sponsorship. Consider the role of culture as part of the corporate cohesion strategy and workforce equality strategy update, which is due to be presented to the committee in May 24. Refer this report to Children, Families and Skills Scrutiny Committee for them to review the report in terms of the updates provided on education and skills. Offers us to revisit a series of reports produced and commissioned since 2012, including the Work Foundation on the creative economy in Lancashire and the LCC Scrutiny Task Group report towards a stronger sense of place. A further report to come back to the committee in November 24 to update the committee on how work is progressing. And all this will inform the draft cultural services strategy for 2024 to 2026. And hope
Peter will take the timescales.
Yeah, well, one question and one comment. First question, I think it was the second one, which was quite early on in our presentation. You said all organisations to do a breakdown or whatever, I think phrase. We ended up the conversation talking about a bowling club. Now, I wouldn't say there were going to be thousands. So I'm just questioning the all organisations. At what level you meaning? Okay, my second point then, I understand the requirement from scrutiny, and as cabinet member, I'll take what you've said. There's a tremendous amount of work here, and our primary, I would dare say, we've got to be mindful that we are servicing a number of customers. And what I wouldn't want to, what I would suggest, I mean, scrutiny, you can ask whatever you like to me as cabinet member. But I would just ask that you bear in mind that we have got another funding round coming up and we've only got finite officers to manage that piece of work. So it's the extent of work and the timescale you're going to be asking that work to be completed by.
Just to comment, I mean, I think I did say earlier, we thought of November. Of course, we've got to get the next work programme through the Scrutiny Management Board. And I'm sure the Chairman will agree with me. We've heard what you said about the timescale. We just thought of November. We can always juggle that a bit later in the cycle, give it another year, because we actually don't finally blot the work programme. That will be at the management. So if we took that later, we'd said November, if we gave you more time for some of those questions. Yeah.
As we did with the last scrutiny committee, whereby we said we don't all expect all of this this year. If you decide the priorities in terms of putting this cultural strategy document forward, and we can bring some of this stuff back next year.
Yeah.
And look at this.
Yeah.
You know, break it down into some more constituent parts, because we'll keep. I mean, we didn't do culture at all last year, Peter, and you know, the enthusiasm today has been massive. So tell us what you intend to do and what you can do and timescales,
Yeah.
and the rest we'll bring back next year.
Thank you. If that's acceptable
Yeah,
to the
that's
committee, I
acceptable.
think that's
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be realistic and pragmatic, but
Can I just,
the amount that list was a long list.
Can I just mention that some of this could be tied in with district council work as well, and the engagement?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. We all go on that. Not of. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
We've got the work program just to blocks, but we've agreed.
So in terms of the second report on the Culture and Sport Fund, we got 4 from the officers. So let me read. Well, you've got them all in front of you. First one is to continue to reach Lancashire residents and community groups in more areas, so all districts have an equitable share of Lancashire Culture and Sport Fund. I think that's a given, isn't it?
Yeah.
To continue to target underrepresented areas and communities. I mean, that comes with more data and more information. So yeah, working with district councils and community organisations, if you can actually get something from some district councils to provide those projects in low income areas and for underrepresented communities. Charlie had an issue with that. Yeah, I do as well. So
Just read it again.
to prioritise those projects in low income areas and to underrepresented communities. I mean, ultimately it depends whether you've got a group who's going to put an application forward, doesn't it?
Areas, and if we don't give them priority, then they're never going to be part of the game. They're never going to be able to have that opportunity and chance to engage and have access to the funding. That's how I see it, but it might be, I don't know how people are interpreting it.
I think what you look at is disadvantaged
Yeah.
anyway, vulnerable communities, and I think that's where it ties in.
Yeah.
Very circumspect running that.
I like the idea of highlighting and highlighting and
That was a recommendation. I'm sure they deal with it in the right way. Yeah.
To highlight and to encourage.
Yeah.
Which be able to support more projects. So I think we've probably solved it that way.
They might be saying, I mean, you might be talking about a similar group, but it is about a priority of certain groups that are low income or whatever. So it may not necessarily, but it could tie in with the groups anyway. It doesn't really matter.
Respect the recommendation.
Are we still being filmed? Right. So that the officers prioritise probably each application rather than the area that they come from, and I'm sure you'll do that anyway. So if you do that, then I'm very happy.
I think the fact that we're recommending 4 to lower it down to 15 will open the scope, so there will be more low, if you like, lower end, low income areas will be included within the whole. It's just that if 4 wasn't accepted, then there is then going to be an issue that we would have to then consider. So you know, if we remove 3 out of the recommendations, is that what you're effectively saying? So it's just 1, 2, and 4. Is that a scrutiny? It's a question. Yeah.
Go through any other committee, Peter? Does it have to go through cabinet?
No, this is a steer from scrutiny to it's, as I said at the outset, that unlike perhaps previous times when scrutiny was after the event, scrutinise the decision, this is helping shape the decision, and that's exactly what you've just done today. So thank you.
Can I move those recommendations then, Chairman? Move that report.
Move the report, yeah. Okay. Okay, so moving on. So, yeah. So can I just thank the officers massively for today? And as I say, as you can detect from the enthusiasm and the participation today, it's been a really important issue. And I think it's really important that it comes back in and focuses on items that have been identified today, next year, even if that you don't get a chance to highlight those in the new strategy. I think that'll be incredibly useful. So we've already got part of next year's program. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Thank you very
Okay. Thank you very much.
so much. Just the work program, isn't it?
So
The work program. There's only 2 items. Can I move the work program, Chairman?
so the only bit that I'd like to query is on page 93, top of page 93, regarding property asset disposals, data to be broken down by district geographic location. Could that be presented to us in the form of a spreadsheet? I'm really interested, particularly in land that's been disposed of. There are 2 parcels of land that have gone in Ribble Valley. I don't know where they are. And I'd like to find out where they are. And I'm sure other members would like to find out kind of, what's gone and where. I suspect they're all in Clitheroe as well, so which, it's just one of the. So are we okay? Move that, yeah.
Well done.
Is that all we need to do? Yeah, okay. Thank you, guys. 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Did all right.
We had a fault with, with our technical issues right at the start. So